Hello everyone, I am the Boring Historian, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from, and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Lady Miyuki awoke before dawn, as she had every day for the past 7 years of her life within the Oku, the great interior, the women's quarters of Edo Castle. The soft glow of the Andon lamp cast gentle shadows across the tatami floor of her private chambers, more spacious than those of most women in the inner palace, but still a cage, no matter how gilded. Outside, she could hear the faint rustling of her attendants preparing for the day. They would enter soon, at the exact moment protocol dictated, not a heartbeat earlier or later. She sat up slowly, allowing herself a private moment before the day's performances began. At 32, Miyuki had survived longer than most in the treacherous waters of the shogunal harem. A daughter of the modest Takeda family, distantly related to the powerful Maeda clan of Kaga domain, she had entered the Oku at 25, older than most concubines, who typically arrived as teenagers. Perhaps that maturity had been her salvation. She understood from the beginning that survival here required more than beauty. It demanded intelligence, observation, and a perfect understanding of when to speak and when to remain silent. Her status as Makaki Joro, a high-ranking concubine who had borne the shogun a child, afforded her privileges many others could only dream of. Private quarters with 3 dedicated attendants, finer silks for her kimono, and most precious of all, occasional access to her son, Takechiyo, now 6 years old. Though he lived in the male quarters of the castle, separated from her by impenetrable walls of stone, wood, and protocol, she was permitted to see him during certain festivals and ceremonies. A privilege that could be revoked at any moment should she misstep. As the first hints of dawn light filtered through the shoji screens, Miyuki closed her eyes and centered herself. Today would be significant. The shogun's mother, the Lady Keisho Inn, had requested her presence for a tea ceremony in the afternoon. Such invitations were rarely social pleasantries. They were chess moves in the complex game of uku politics. "My lady," came the soft voice of Sachi, her chief attendant, as the Fusuma door slid open with a whisper. "It is time." Miyuki opened her eyes, her moment of private reflection over. "Yes," she said, her voice measured and calm. "Let us begin." The ritual of morning preparations commenced with practiced precision. First came Tama and Yuki, her junior attendants, carrying the tools for her morning toilet. Miyuki allowed herself to be helped from her futon, standing as they removed her sleeping garments. Despite 7 years within these walls, she had never fully adjusted to the lack of privacy, the constant eyes that watched, assessed, and reported. "The water is properly heated, my lady," Tama said, gesturing to the ceramic basin. "Not too hot." "Thank you." Miyuki allowed them to wash her face and hands with warm cloths. 7 years ago, she would have performed this simple task herself at her family home. Now, such independence would be considered inappropriate for a woman of her status. As Sachi approached with the makeup implements, Miyuki studied her reflection in the small bronze mirror. Her face remained unlined, her skin pale and smooth, the result of rigorous care and avoidance of sunlight. Within the Oku, pallor was prized. It distinguished ladies of refinement from common women who worked in the fields. Her large, dark eyes revealed nothing of her thoughts, a skill she had perfected through years of necessity. "The Lady Keisho Inn has requested your presence today," Sachi mentioned as she applied white lead makeup to Miyuki's face with practiced strokes. "For the tea ceremony in the Fuji room." "Yes," Miyuki replied. Though she had been informed last night by a messenger, it was part of the ritual for her attendant to remind her of important appointments. Nothing in the oku happened by chance. Every interaction was choreographed. Has there been any word about who else will be in attendance? Sachi's brush paused almost imperceptibly, a hesitation only Miyuki would notice. Lady Yoko will be there, and Lady Sono. Interesting. Lady Yoko was the shogun's newest concubine, only 19 years old and already pregnant. Lady Sono was a longtime confidant of the shogun's mother. This would not be a casual gathering. I see, Miyuki said, her tone revealing nothing. Then we shall select the plum blossom kimono for today, with the blue underrobes. Sachi nodded, understanding the calculation behind the choice. The kimono, with its subtle pattern of plum blossoms against a pale gray background, projected refined elegance without ostentation. It would please Lady Keisho-in, who disapproved of showy displays, while the blue underrobes, visible at the collar and sleeves, were a reminder of Miyuki's connection to the Maeda clan, whose family crest incorporated that shade. As Sachi finished applying the makeup, the white base, the touch of red at the corners of the eyes, the carefully painted small crimson lips, Yuki and Tama laid out the day's garments. First the white cotton undergarments, then the various layers of silk juban, each more refined than the last, and finally the exquisite outer kimono itself. Dressing was another intricate ritual. Each layer had to sit perfectly, creating the proper silhouette. The obi, a masterpiece of woven gold and silver threads on midnight blue silk, would be tied in the court maiden style, elaborate but not too showy. Everything about Miyuki's appearance had to communicate her position, high enough to command respect, not so high as to provoke jealousy from those above her. As Tama worked on arranging her hair in the traditional style worn by ladies of the oku, pulled back from the face, arranged in loops with decorative combs, Miyuki watched the activity in the garden outside her window. Junior attendants were sweeping the stone paths, while guards stood at discreet distances, their presence a constant reminder that despite all its refinement, the oku was still a prison of sorts. No woman entered or left without the shogun's permission. "Is there news of my son today?" Miyuki asked, keeping her voice neutral despite the longing that never ceased. "Young Lord Takechio begins his calligraphy lessons today," Sachi replied. "I heard he has been most diligent in his preparations." Miyuki allowed herself a small smile, the only indication of the pride and pain that coursed through her at the mention of her child. Born of her union with the shogun, Takechio was being raised in the male quarters of the palace, educated as befitted a son of the Tokugawa line. Though not the heir, the shogun's official wife had provided that essential child. Takechio might still serve important political functions. The shogun had recognized him, which offered both protection and peril. "His brush strokes were becoming quite elegant when last I saw him," Miyuki said softly. It had been nearly 2 months since their last meeting during the Chrysanthemum Festival. Those brief, formal encounters were carefully orchestrated, with numerous attendants present. Never once in 6 years had she been permitted to hold her son in her arms without witnesses, to speak to him without choosing each word with diplomatic precision. When her toilet was complete, Miyuki rose and allowed her attendants to guide her through the series of rooms that comprised her quarters. Modest by the standards of the outside world, but luxurious within the hierarchy of the oku. She had a private sitting room where she could receive visitors of appropriate rank, a small library containing the books and scrolls she was permitted to read, and even a tiny garden viewable from her chambers, though she could only step into it during designated hours. Breakfast awaited her on a lacquered tray, a small portion of rice, grilled fish, pickled vegetables, and clear soup. The Oku's kitchens produced exquisite meals, but portions were deliberately kept small for the ladies of the inner palace. Plumpness was considered uncouth. A slender figure was expected of women who might be called to the shogun's bed. As she ate, Sachi reviewed the day's schedule. After breakfast, Lady Junko has requested to pay her respects. Lady Junko, once a favored concubine who had never borne a child, had slipped in status over the years but maintained connections throughout the Oku. Then you have your poetry lesson with Master Ryuho at the hour of the snake. Midday meal will be served in your chambers, and then preparation for the tea ceremony with Lady Keisho Inn at the hour of the horse. Miyuki nodded, mentally preparing for each encounter. Lady Junko would be seeking information, as always. The poetry lesson was ostensibly for cultural refinement, but Master Ryuho, one of the few men permitted into certain areas of the Oku, also served as an occasional messenger, bringing discreet news from the outside world. And the tea ceremony, that would require all her diplomatic skills. Has there been any indication why Lady Keisho Inn has requested my presence today? Miyuki asked, though she knew Sachi would have mentioned it immediately if such information were available. None, my lady, Sachi replied, though there are whispers that the shogun may visit the Ooku within the next few days. Miyuki kept her expression unchanged, though her mind immediately began calculating possibilities. The shogun's visits to the women's palace were never random. They served political purposes, dynastic purposes, or occasionally emotional ones. If he was coming, it meant someone's status was about to rise or fall dramatically. As she finished her meal, the soft sound of the shrine bell marked the beginning of the hour of the dragon. The day had officially begun in Edo Castle, and with it, the intricate dance of power, survival, and occasional joy that constituted life in the shadow of the chrysanthemum throne. Lady Junko arrived precisely when expected, accompanied by her sole remaining attendant, a stark reminder of how far her star had fallen. Once she had commanded a retinue of 5, now at 46, with her beauty faded and having failed to produce an heir, she survived on the shogun's distant mercy and her own shrewd intelligence. Lady Miyuki, she said, bowing with perfect form as she entered the sitting room. You honor me with your reception. The honor is mine, Lady Junko, Miyuki replied, gesturing for her guest to be seated on the cushion across from her own. Sachi appeared silently with tea and small confections shaped like plum blossoms, serving them before retreating to the corner of the room, present as propriety demanded, but positioned to give an illusion of privacy. Junko was dressed in subdued colors, browns and deep greens that signaled her withdrawal from active competition in the Oku. Yet her kimono was still of fine silk, her hair still arranged with careful attention. In the women's palace, appearance was currency, and Junko had not surrendered completely to her diminished circumstances. They exchanged pleasantries, discussing the early spring weather, the recent poetry competition among the ladies in waiting, the quality of the incense that had arrived from Kyoto. Only after these necessary social rituals did Junko lean slightly forward, her voice dropping. They say the shogun will visit us soon, she said, her eyes sharp beneath her composed expression. So I have heard, Miyuki acknowledged, taking a measured sip of her tea. Though the inner chambers are always full of rumors, Junko smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. Some rumors carry more weight than others, particularly when they originate from the chambers of the Great Interior Elder. The Great Interior Elder, the highest-ranking woman in the Oku, besides the shogun's mother and official wife, controlled the daily operations of the women's palace. If she was the source of the rumor, it carried significant weight indeed. Has there been mention of whom he might be visiting? Miyuki asked, her tone casual despite the importance of the question. Junko's fan opened with a soft snap, partially concealing her face, as was customary when discussing delicate matters. Lady Yoko's pregnancy progresses well. It would be natural for him to check on the health of his forthcoming child. Of course, Miyuki nodded. The shogun's concern for his children is well known. She allowed a calculated pause. And his other interests? Junko's eyes gleamed with appreciation for the subtle inquiry. There are whispers that he has expressed interest in the new arrival, the young lady from Satsuma. Interesting. The girl from Satsuma had arrived only 2 months ago, the daughter of a powerful daimyo from the southern domain. At 16, she represented a potentially valuable political alliance for the shogun. She is said to be accomplished on the koto, Miyuki observed. And in calligraphy, Junko added. Though she lacks experience in certain essential aspects of oku life, meaning the girl was still untouched, still learning the complex rules that governed intimate relations with the shogun. Such encounters were never simply about physical desire. They were political acts, ceremonial performances with consequences that could echo through the power structures of the entire country. Youth has its own wisdom, Miyuki said diplomatically, though both women understood the dangers facing an inexperienced girl in these treacherous waters. Junko inclined her head in acknowledgement. Speaking of wisdom, she continued, changing direction in the conversation. Your son is said to be impressing his tutors. The sword master in particular speaks highly of his potential. Miyuki felt the familiar complex surge of emotions. Pride in her child's accomplishments, fear for his position in the ruthless hierarchy of the shogun's sons, and the constant ache of their separation. Takichio is diligent, she said simply. I am grateful for the skilled instruction he receives. The shogun mentioned him at the last council meeting, Junko added, offering the real purpose of her visit, information that Miyuki would otherwise have no way of obtaining. He spoke approvingly of the boy's progress. Miyuki bowed her head slightly, acknowledging both the information and the favor Junko had done her by sharing it. You are kind to tell me this. We who have navigated these waters for many years must support one another, Junko replied, the brief flash of genuine emotion in her eyes revealing the truth beneath the formal words. In the Oku, where women were perpetually positioned as rivals, true alliances were rare and precious. They spoke for a while longer, exchanging the currency of the women's palace, information, subtle observations, carefully phrased opinions. When Junko finally took her leave, both women had gained something from the encounter. Junko had secured Miyuki's continued goodwill, valuable given Miyuki's current standing, while Miyuki had gathered intelligence vital to navigating the shifting alliances of the day. After Junko's departure, there was just enough time for Miyuki to review her poetry before Master Ryuho's arrival. She knelt at her small writing table, brushing the characters of a verse she had been composing about cherry blossoms. A common theme, but one that allowed for layers of meaning. Petals fall softly, though their branches reach skyward. Roots remain hidden. The poem could be read as a simple observation of nature or understood as a commentary on power, how those who appear to fall may still have hidden strengths, how those who reach for glory remain rooted in unseen foundations. Such ambiguity was essential in Oku poetry. Direct expression of political opinions would be dangerous indeed. Master Ryuho arrived at the hour of the snake, escorted by 2 male guards, and one of the elder women who chaperoned any male visitors to the women's palace. At 67, with his wispy white beard and stooped shoulders, he hardly seemed a threat to female virtue, but protocols were rigidly observed regardless of circumstances. Lady Miyuki, he greeted her, bowing deeply despite his age. "I trust you have been continuing your studies?" "Yes, master," she replied, gesturing toward her writing table. "I have been contemplating the transience of cherry blossoms." "An evergreen theme," he said with a small smile at his own wordplay. "Let us see what insights you have cultivated." The lesson proceeded with formal correctness, with Master Ryuho commenting on her brushwork, suggesting alternative characters, discussing the philosophical underpinnings of traditional poetic themes. The old woman chaperone sat in the corner, her eyes half closed but missing nothing. It was only when Sachi entered to refresh the tea that Master Ryuho managed to pass his real message, speaking softly as the sounds of pouring liquid covered his words. "There is unrest in Mito domain," he murmured. The daimyo there questioned some of the shogun's recent trade concessions to the Dutch. Miyuki nodded almost imperceptibly, absorbing this information while maintaining her composed expression. Mito was ruled by a branch of the Tokugawa family itself. Descent from that quarter carried significant weight. "The cherry trees in Mito are said to bloom most beautifully," she replied, their coded exchange completed. The rest of the lesson continued without incident, focusing on the technical aspects of poetry composition. When Master Ryuho departed, Miyuki found herself contemplating the political implications of his news. The shogun's policies regarding foreign trade had been controversial among the more conservative daimyo. If Mito was openly expressing disapproval, others might follow. Such information might prove valuable during her afternoon tea ceremony with Lady Keisho-hin, who had her own strong opinions about foreign influences. Miyuki would need to gauge the older woman's stance carefully before revealing what she knew. As the midday meal was served, another artfully arranged tray of small, exquisite portions, Miyuki found herself thinking of the world beyond the oku walls. Unlike many of the women who had been brought here as children, she had memories of another life, running through her family's gardens, accompanying her father to temple festivals, even occasionally glimpsing the sailors and foreign merchants who passed through the port near her childhood home. Those experiences had shaped her understanding in ways that many oku ladies could not comprehend. She knew there was more to existence than the endless intrigue and ceremonial performances of the women's palace. Yet this knowledge was both blessing and curse. It allowed her to navigate court politics with unique perspective, but it also left her acutely aware of all she had sacrificed. "The bath has been prepared, my lady," Sachi announced, interrupting her thoughts. "We should begin preparing for the tea ceremony soon." Miyuki nodded, setting aside her reflections. The afternoon would require all her focus, all her skill. In the oku, momentary distractions could lead to fatal missteps. "Yes," she said, rising with practiced grace. "Let us ensure we are properly prepared to honor Lady Keisho." The chess game continued, each move requiring perfect execution. And like any skilled player, Miyuki was already thinking several moves ahead. The Fuji Room, named for the delicate painted murals of Mount Fuji that adorned its walls, was located in the heart of the oku, adjacent to the private chambers of Lady Keisho-in. As the mother of the shogun, she maintained substantial influence over both the women's palace and, through her son, the political affairs of the nation. Though she had officially retired to Buddhist devotions, everyone understood that her withdrawal from worldly matters was largely ceremonial. Miyuki was led through a series of increasingly restricted corridors, passing checkpoints where stern-faced female guards verified her invitation. The inner sanctums of the oku were layered like an onion, with access becoming more limited the closer one came to the chambers of the highest-ranking women. Most concubines, even those of relatively high status, would never see these rooms. The fact that Miyuki had been summoned here was significant, a recognition of her position, but also potentially a dangerous honor. Proximity to power in the Oku often meant proximity to peril. "Lady Miyuki," announced the attendant at the final doorway, sliding open the fusuma to reveal the Fuji room in all its elegant simplicity. Lady Keishoin knelt beside the sunken hearth where water was already heating for tea. At 63, her face showed few signs of age, the result of rigorous skincare regimens and limited exposure to the sun. Her kimono was somber in color, befitting her status as a woman who had ostensibly turned her thoughts towards spiritual matters. But the quality of the silk and the subtle gold embroidery at the sleeves betrayed her continued attachment to worldly refinements. Lady Yoko was already present, kneeling on a cushion to Lady Keishoin's right, her pregnant belly just beginning to show beneath her lavish kimono of red and gold. Colors that would have been considered ostentatious for anyone else, but appropriate for a woman carrying what might be the shogun's next son. At 19, her face still held the roundness of youth, though her eyes reflected the rapid education in court politics she had received since catching the shogun's attention. Lady Sono knelt on the opposite side, her thin face impassive as always. As Lady Keishoin's confidante for over 20 years, she had mastered the art of revealing nothing while observing everything. "You honor us with your presence, Lady Miyuki," Lady Keishoin said, her voice carrying the distinctive accent of the northern provinces where she had been born. Despite decades in Edo, she had never fully abandoned this trace of her origins. Perhaps a deliberate choice, a reminder that she had come from outside, yet risen to the pinnacle of court society. "The honor is entirely mine, Lady Keishoin," Miyuki replied, bowing deeply before taking her place on the remaining cushion, positioned so that the four women formed a perfect square around the hearth. The arrangement was deliberate. Neither Miyuki nor Lady Yoko could claim precedence in this seating. Two attendants remained in the room, kneeling silently against the far wall, while the rest had been dismissed, an indication that this tea ceremony would include conversation not meant for wider ears. The ritual began with practiced precision. Lady Keishoin, despite her rank, performed the tea preparation herself, a subtle reminder of her mastery of all feminine arts. Her movements were graceful, unhurried, each gesture invested with meaning as she warmed the tea bowl, measured the powdered green tea, and whisked it to a perfect froth with the bamboo chaser. The first bowl was offered to Lady Yoko, honoring her condition as bearer of the next Tokugawa child. The young woman accepted it with appropriate murmurs of appreciation, turning the bowl in her hands according to proper ceremony before taking 3 careful sips. When it came Miyuki's turn to receive the tea, she was acutely conscious of Lady Keishoin's evaluating gaze. The older woman had never fully approved of Miyuki's elevation to the status of secondary consort, considering her family connections insufficient for such honor. Yet she had also never moved against Miyuki, seeming to acknowledge the younger woman's discretion and intelligence. "The tea is excellent," Miyuki commented after her ritualistic sips. "The subtle hint of cherry blossom is particularly elegant." Lady Keishoin inclined her head in acknowledgement. "From the new shipment that arrived from Uji last week, I find it appropriate for the season, a reminder that beauty can be preserved through proper attention, even as its original form passes." The comment could be taken as a simple observation about tea, but in the layered speech of the Oku, it likely carried additional meaning. Was it a reminder of the transient nature of physical beauty, a comment on the preservation of traditions, or perhaps a warning about maintaining one's usefulness beyond one's prime? Indeed, Miyuki responded carefully. Though each season brings its own forms of beauty worth appreciating. The conversation continued in this vein as the tea ceremony progressed through its stages. Oblique comments that could be interpreted in multiple ways. Observations that carried political undertones beneath their aesthetic surfaces. Lady Yoko, still relatively new to these verbal chess matches, spoke little, her eyes moving between the older women as she tried to follow the subtext. It was only after the formal portions of the ceremony concluded, when Lady Keisho-in had ordered the small sweet cakes to be served, that the true purpose of the gathering began to emerge. I understand your son continues to show promise in his studies, Lady Miyuki, Lady Keisho-in remarked. Her tone casual, though her eyes were sharp. I am grateful for your interest in Takechiyo's progress, Miyuki replied. His tutors speak well of his diligence. Lady Keisho-in nodded slowly. The shogun has noted his aptitude as well. There has been some discussion of appointing him to a minor ceremonial role during the upcoming Sano festival. Miyuki kept her expression composed despite the surge of emotion this news provoked. Such an appointment would be a significant honor for a 6-year-old boy, particularly one born of a secondary consort. It would also place Takechiyo more firmly in the public eye, a position that carried both opportunities and dangers. The young lord would be honored by such consideration, she said carefully. Lady Sono spoke for the first time. Of course, such visibility brings responsibilities. The boy's behavior would reflect not only on himself, but on his lineage, on both sides. The implication was clear. Takechiyo's performance would be scrutinized not just as a reflection of the Tokugawa bloodline, but of Miyuki's family as well. Any misstep could be used against both of them. Takechiyo understands the importance of proper conduct, Miyuki assured them. Even at his young age, he grasps the significance of his position. Lady Keisho-in's mouth curved in what might generously be called a smile. Children of intelligence often grasp more than we expect, she agreed, which is why proper guidance is essential. She turned her attention to Lady Yoko. Your child will also require such guidance when the time comes. The education of Tokugawa sons must balance tradition with awareness of changing circumstances. Lady Yoko bowed her head. I will be guided by your wisdom in all matters concerning the child's upbringing, Lady Keisho-in. Wisdom comes in many forms, the older woman replied. Some gained through experience, some through observation. Her gaze returned to Miyuki. Lady Miyuki has demonstrated a particularly keen eye for observation over the years. Was this a compliment or an accusation? With Lady Keisho-in, it was often difficult to tell. I merely try to understand the complexities of our world, Miyuki said modestly, both within these walls and beyond them. Indeed. Lady Keisho-in set down her tea bowl with deliberate precision. And what do your observations tell you about the current temperament of the court, particularly regarding the shogun's policies on foreign trade? Here was the crux of the matter. Lady Keisho-in was fishing for information, trying to gauge the political currents among the daimyo families, to whom Miyuki might still have connections. Miyuki considered her response carefully. The information from Master Ryuho about unrest in Mito domain could be valuable currency, but sharing it carelessly might reveal her sources. More importantly, she needed to determine Lady Keisho-in's own position before revealing what she knew. There seemed to be diverse perspectives among the noble families. She began cautiously. Some see opportunity in controlled expansion of trade, while others fear the corruption of our traditions through foreign influence. Lady Keisho-in's eyes narrowed slightly. And your own family's connections? What do they observe? My cousin, who serves in the Maida household, suggests that even within individual domains, opinions are divided. Miyuki replied, offering a partial truth. The elder counselors tend toward caution, while younger samurai sometimes favor greater engagement with foreign knowledge, particularly in matters of military technology. Lady Keishoin exchanged a glance with Lady Sono, a brief look that nonetheless conveyed volumes. Divided counsel can lead to divided action, she observed. The southern domains especially seem restless in their opinions. This was the opening Miyuki had been waiting for. I have heard similar observations, she agreed. Though I understand the concerns extend beyond the south, even in domains as close to the shogunate as Mito, there are questions about the balance between tradition and innovation. Lady Keishoin's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication that Miyuki's information had surprised her. Indeed, and how recently have you heard these observations? Perspectives shift like spring winds, Miyuki replied obliquely. What appears settled one day may reveal new contours the next. The older woman studied her for a long moment before nodding slightly. A wise reminder, she said. We must remain attentive to such shifting winds. Lady Yoko looked confused by the exchange, but Lady Sono's thin lips had curved into the faintest suggestion of a smile, appreciation from one political operative to another. The shogun values diverse perspectives, Lady Keishoin continued, in matters of state as well as household arrangements. This shift in topic was significant. Household arrangements, within the context of the oku, typically referred to the shogun's sexual partners and the resulting power dynamics. I have always admired His Excellency's discernment, Miyuki replied carefully. Lady Keishoin inclined her head. He has expressed interest in visiting the inner chambers within the next few days. To check on Lady Yoko's health, naturally, she added with a nod toward the pregnant young woman, but also perhaps to seek diversion. The implication hung in the air. After years without being summoned to the shogun's bed, not since Takichiyo's conception, was Miyuki being warned of a potential renewal of interest? Or was Lady Keishoin suggesting the opposite, that despite Miyuki's political usefulness, her days as a sexual companion were definitively over? His Excellency's attention honors whomever he chooses, Miyuki said, the formal response required in such circumstances. Indeed. Lady Keishoin set down her tea bowl with a soft click against the tatami. Though I have observed that his choices often reflect practical considerations as well as personal inclinations. Lady Sono nodded. Connection to influential families becomes increasingly important in uncertain times. Again, the subtext was clear. The shogun's choice of bed partners was never merely about physical attraction. It reflected political calculations, alliance building, statements of favor or disfavor toward particular factions. If he was considering renewing intimacy with Miyuki, it likely indicated a desire to strengthen ties with the Maeda clan, to whom she was distantly related. The harmony of the household reflects the harmony of the nation, Miyuki observed, using a common saying that acknowledged the political dimensions of the shogun's personal relationships. Wisely stated, Lady Keishoin agreed. And those who contribute to such harmony perform a valuable service. The conversation shifted then to more ceremonial topics, preparations for upcoming seasonal festivals, the performance of the no actors who had recently visited the palace, the quality of silk in the latest shipment from Kyoto. But Miyuki understood that the essential exchange had been completed. She had been summoned to provide information about political currents beyond the palace walls, and possibly to be prepared for a renewal of the shogun's attentions. As the tea ceremony concluded and the women prepared to depart, Lady Keishoin detained Miyuki with a slight gesture. "A moment, Lady Miyuki," she said, waiting until the others had exited before continuing. Your son has his father's intelligence and his mother's perception, both qualities that can serve him well or lead him into difficulty, depending on how they are directed. The statement was both compliment and warning, recognition of Takchio's potential and a reminder of his vulnerability. I understand, Miyuki replied simply. Lady Keisho-in studied her for a long moment. I believe you do, she said finally. More than most within these walls. It is why you have survived when others with greater beauty or higher birth have faltered. Coming from the shogun's mother, this was significant praise indeed. Miyuki bowed deeply. Your guidance has been invaluable, Lady Keisho-in. The older woman made a dismissive gesture, though her eyes reflected a certain satisfaction. We each play our parts in maintaining the prosperity of the Tokugawa line. Some through childbearing, some through counsel, some through discretion, and some through all three, Miyuki suggested boldly. Lady Keisho-in's mouth curved in what might almost have been a genuine smile. Indeed. Go now. I suspect you have much to consider before the evening comes. Miyuki bowed again and departed, her mind already analyzing every nuance of the conversation. If the shogun truly intended to visit her after so many years, she would need to be prepared, physically, mentally, and politically. And if Lady Keisho-in had merely been testing her reactions, that too required careful consideration. As she was escorted back through the labyrinthine corridors of the inner palace, Miyuki maintained her composed expression, despite the turmoil of her thoughts. In the Oku, even momentary lapses in self-control could be observed, reported, and exploited. Only in the privacy of her own chambers could she begin to process the implications of the afternoon's events. She had been drawn deeper into the political machinations of the court, a position of greater influence but also greater danger. And her son, her precious Takechio, was being positioned for a more public role that would expose him to similar risks. The chrysanthemum throne cast long shadows, and those who dwelled within them walked a perpetual knife's edge between power and peril. Miyuki had survived thus far through intelligence, observation, and perfect control. Now, more than ever, she would need all three. The soft glow of lanterns illuminated Miyuki's chambers as evening descended upon Edo Castle. Outside her windows, shadows lengthened across the garden paths, and the first stars appeared in the deepening blue sky. Inside, Sachi had lit the incense, a subtle blend of sandalwood and plum blossom that perfumed the air without overwhelming the senses. Miyuki knelt before her writing table, composing a letter to her cousin in the Maeda household, ostensibly a formal note of seasonal greetings, but containing carefully phrased inquiries about family matters that would be understood as requests for political information. Such correspondence was one of the few connections she maintained to the world beyond the Oku walls, and even these letters were subject to inspection by palace officials. My lady, Sachi's voice came softly from the doorway. Lady Ochiba requests permission to visit you. Miyuki looked up, her brush pausing mid-character. Lady Ochiba was one of the elderly women who had served in the Oku for over 40 years, originally as a concubine and later as a trusted advisor. Now in her 70s, she rarely left her own chambers except for the most significant ceremonies. For her to request an evening visit was highly unusual. Of course, Miyuki replied, setting aside her writing implements. Please prepare tea and ensure we have privacy. Sachi bowed and withdrew, understanding that privacy meant positioning the junior attendants far enough away that conversation could not be easily overheard, while still maintaining the proper appearance of chaperoned propriety. Lady Ochiba arrived a few minutes later, leaning heavily on an ebony cane. Despite her advanced age, her back remained straight, her white hair impeccably arranged in the traditional style of the Genroku era, when she had first entered the women's palace. Her kimono was somber in color but made from the finest silk, a reflection of her status as one of the eldest inhabitants of the Oku. "Lady Miyuki," she greeted, her voice thin but steady. "Forgive an old woman for disturbing your evening." "There is nothing to forgive," Miyuki assured her, helping the elderly woman to settle on a cushion. "Your presence honors my humble chambers." Once Lady Ochiba was seated and tea had been served, Sachi withdrew to the far corner of the room, present but unobtrusive, as protocol demanded. "I hear you were summoned to tea with Lady Keisho in today," Ochiba began, her faded eyes sharp with interest. "Yes," Miyuki confirmed, unsurprised that news traveled so quickly within the Oku. "A most instructive afternoon." Lady Ochiba nodded slowly. The Lady Keisho has always had a gift for instruction, though her lessons sometimes contain unexpected elements. Miyuki inclined her head, acknowledging the oblique warning. "I believe I understood the essential points of today's lesson." "Did you?" The elderly woman sipped her tea, studying Miyuki over the rim of the cup. "Tell me, child, what do you know of the Ajima incident?" The question seemed to come from nowhere, but Miyuki knew better than to assume randomness in Ochiba's conversation. The Ajima incident had occurred decades ago, before Miyuki was born, but it remained infamous within the Oku. A scandal involving Lady Ajima, a high-ranking lady-in-waiting who had been caught meeting a kabuki actor outside the palace walls. The affair had resulted in numerous punishments, including Lady Ajima's exile and the execution of several guards who had facilitated her forbidden excursions. "I know what the official records tell us," Miyuki replied carefully. "Lady Ajima violated protocol by visiting a kabuki theater and meeting with the actor Ikushima Shingoro. For this transgression, she was exiled, the actor imprisoned, and several others punished severely." "Official records," Lady Ochiba murmured, her thin lips curving in what might have been a smile. "Always so neat, so clear in their judgments. Reality, I have found, is rarely so orderly." She set down her teacup with hands that trembled slightly from age but still moved with deliberate precision. "What the records do not say is that Lady Ajima was carrying messages, not love notes, as was rumored, but political communications between certain daimyo families and merchants who opposed the shogun's policies." Miyuki kept her expression neutral despite her surprise. This was dangerous knowledge, even decades later. "I had not heard this perspective." "Few have," Ochiba acknowledged. "The scandal of a romantic affair was far more convenient for all parties than the truth of political intrigue. The shogunate could punish the transgressors without revealing the deeper threat, and the opposing factions could distance themselves from the failed conspiracy." She leaned forward slightly. "But do you know why I mention this ancient history today, Lady Miyuki?" "I presume there is a connection to current circumstances," Miyuki ventured. Ochiba nodded, approval in her rheumy eyes. "Always perceptive. Yes, there are echoes. When the shogun shows renewed interest in a concubine who has connections to certain domains, currently expressing dissatisfaction with trade policies, when his mother arranges private tea ceremonies to discuss these very matters, old women like me begin to remember old patterns." The implication was clear. Lady Keisho suspected Miyuki might be involved in political communications between her family connections and forces opposing the shogun's policies. The tea ceremony had been, at least partially, an investigation. "I have always served the Tokugawa house with complete loyalty," Miyuki said carefully. "I do not doubt it," Ochiba replied. "But loyalty is perceived differently depending on where one stands. The Lady Ajima believed herself loyal to Japan, even as she worked against specific policies of the shogunate. She sighed, the sound of decades of observation and survival. I tell you this not as accusation, but as caution. The winds are shifting again. The recent arrivals from the Dutch and English bring troubling reports of wars and changes in the western lands. Some within the castle walls favor greater engagement with these foreigners. Others advocate stronger isolation. The shogun himself appears undecided. And Lady Keishoin's position? Miyuki asked. Ochiba's smile deepened. Ah, now you ask the essential question. She was born to traditional values, yet she is pragmatic enough to recognize changing realities. Her primary concern has always been the preservation of Tokugawa power, by whatever means necessary. The elderly woman reached out, her papery hand settling briefly on Miyuki's sleeve. Be careful in the coming days, child. If the shogun does indeed visit you, remember that every word, every gesture will be reported and analyzed. Your position, and your son's, remains precarious despite your years of service. Thank you for your counsel, Miyuki said, bowing her head in genuine gratitude. Few in the Oku would risk speaking so directly, even in the relative privacy of personal chambers. Ochiba nodded, then changed the subject with the practiced ease of a courtier. I understand your son begins his public calligraphy lessons this week, a significant step in his education. They spoke for a while longer about safer topics, the education of noble sons, the quality of the spring silks, the performances scheduled for the upcoming festival. But beneath the pleasant conversation, Miyuki's mind worked furiously, processing the implications of Ochiba's warning and the new light it cast on her tea ceremony with Lady Keishoin. When Lady Ochiba finally took her leave, leaning heavily on her cane as Sachi escorted her to the door, Miyuki remained kneeling by the low table, outwardly composed but inwardly turbulent. Shall I prepare your evening meal, my lady? Sachi asked upon returning. Yes, Miyuki replied. And afterward, I believe I will retire early. The day has been full. Sachi bowed and withdrew to make the arrangements, leaving Miyuki alone with her thoughts. The comparison to Lady Ijima was troubling. Though Miyuki had never engaged in anything resembling treason, her family connections, and her occasional correspondence with relatives in various domains could be misconstrued. If the political tensions were rising, as both Lady Keishoin and Lady Ochiba suggested, even innocent communications might be viewed with suspicion. More concerning was the implication that the shogun's potential renewal of interest in her might not be motivated by personal desire or even straightforward political alliance, but by a wish to monitor her more closely. To be invited back into his bed after years of neglect. Was it an honor or a trap? The evening meal arrived, another artfully arranged collection of small dishes. Grilled fish with mountain vegetables, pickled daikon radish, clear soup with delicate tofu, and a small portion of rice. Miyuki ate mechanically, her appetite diminished by preoccupation. After the meal, Tama and Yuki arrived to help her prepare for the night. The elaborate hairstyle was dismantled, the many hairpins and ornaments carefully stored in lacquered boxes. The layers of kimono were removed one by one, each folded with precise movements and placed in the cedar chest that protected the valuable silks from insects and humidity. The white face makeup was cleaned away with oil and soft cloths, revealing Miyuki's natural complexion. Still smooth, but bearing the faint traces of maturity around her eyes and mouth. Shall I read to you before sleep, my lady? Tama offered, gesturing toward the small collection of books permitted in Miyuki's chambers, mostly poetry anthologies, moral instruction texts for women, and historical tales deemed appropriate for female consumption. Not tonight, Miyuki declined. I believe I will meditate for a time before retiring. Once dressed in her sleeping yukata of fine white cotton, Miyuki dismissed her attendants, an unusual request, that Sachi acknowledged with a concerned glance but did not question. Alone at last, Miyuki knelt before the small Buddhist altar in the corner of her sleeping chamber. She lit a stick of incense and closed her eyes, seeking the centered calm that had sustained her through 7 years of confinement within these gilded walls. Her thoughts turned to Takachiyo, her beautiful, serious boy, with his father's strong brow and her own observant eyes. If the political currents were shifting as dangerously as Lady Ochiba suggested, his position could become even more vulnerable. The children of secondary consorts were always at risk when power dynamics changed. History was littered with young princes who had been sent to remote monasteries, or worse when they became inconvenient to the main line. The potential appointment to a ceremonial role during the festival could be a blessing or a curse. Greater visibility might offer some protection. It was harder to remove a child who had been publicly acknowledged, but it also created more opportunities for manufactured missteps or perceived insults that could be used against him. Miyuki's hands tightened in her lap, the only outward sign of her inner turmoil. Whatever dangers the shifting political landscape might bring, she would navigate them as she had navigated all previous challenges, with intelligence, perfect control, and unwavering focus on protecting her son. A soft sound at the door interrupted her meditation. Miyuki opened her eyes to see Chi kneeling in the entrance, her expression grave. "Forgive the intrusion, my lady," she said, bowing deeply. "A messenger has arrived from the great interior elder." Miyuki's pulse quickened, though her face remained composed. Messages at this hour were rarely routine matters. "What is the message?" she asked. Sachi kept her eyes lowered. "The shogun will visit the Oku tomorrow evening. You are commanded to prepare yourself to receive him in the peony chamber at the hour of the dog." The peony chamber, one of the rooms designated for intimate encounters between the shogun and his consorts. After 6 years of being passed over, Miyuki was indeed being called back to his bed. "I understand," she said, her voice steady despite the rush of complex emotions the news provoked. "We will begin preparations in the morning." Sachi bowed again and withdrew, sliding the Fusuma door closed behind her. Alone once more, Miyuki returned her gaze to the small altar, the incense still burning in a thin column of fragrant smoke. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own diplomatic performances, its own potential pitfalls and opportunities. For tonight, she needed to find her center, to gather her strength for whatever lay ahead. Outside, the moon rose over Edo Castle, casting silver light across the tiered rooftops and garden paths. Within the Oku, hundreds of women, from the highest consorts to the lowliest servants, continued their circumscribed lives, each playing her assigned role in the elaborate human mechanism that surrounded and supported the shogun's rule. Miyuki extinguished the incense and prepared her futon for sleep. Tomorrow would require all her skills, all her careful preparation. The shogun was not simply a man. He was the living embodiment of power in their world. To be summoned to his presence was both honor and peril, a chance to secure her position or to lose everything in a single misstep. As she lay in the darkness, listening to the distant calls of the night watchman marking the hours, Miyuki reflected on the strange path that had brought her to this place. From a daughter of a minor samurai family to a high-ranking concubine in the shogun's court, from a young woman with dreams of a conventional marriage to the mother of a child she could rarely see, from freedom to gilded confinement, her life had twisted in ways she could never have anticipated. Yet within these constraints, she had found her own forms of power, in knowledge carefully gathered and judiciously shared, in alliances cautiously formed and maintained, in the respect she had earned through intelligence and discretion. and most importantly, in her son, the living embodiment of her legacy, her hope for a future beyond the beautiful prison of the Oku. Sleep came slowly, her mind still turning over the possibilities and dangers of the day to come. But eventually exhaustion claimed her, and Miyuki surrendered to dreams of cherry blossoms falling like snow across the gardens of her childhood home. A place of remembered freedom, far from the shadowed politics of the shogun's court. The midnight bell had just sounded when Miyuki was startled awake by a subtle movement in her chamber. Her eyes opened to darkness, but years in the Oku had sharpened her senses to the presence of others, even in the absence of light. "Who is there?" she asked softly, her hand sliding beneath her pillow where she kept a small tanto knife. Not for violence against others, but as a final resort should dishonor ever make self-determination necessary. Though technically forbidden, many of the higher-ranking women kept such implements hidden, a secret acknowledged but overlooked by the Oku authorities. "Forgive me, Lady Miyuki," came a whisper, barely audible even in the night's stillness. "It is Midori." Miyuki relaxed slightly, recognizing the voice of one of the junior attendants assigned to Lady Yoko's household. "What brings you here at such an hour, Midori? This is highly irregular." The young woman crept closer, kneeling beside Miyuki's futon. In the faint moonlight filtering through the shoji screens, her face appeared ghostly pale, her eyes wide with anxiety. "Lady Yoko sent me," she whispered. "She begs for your counsel, but could not risk requesting a formal audience." Interesting. The pregnant young concubine had seemed passive, even intimidated during the tea ceremony. For her to initiate such an unorthodox communication suggested desperation, or perhaps more cunning than she had revealed in public. "What counsel could I possibly offer that would justify such risk?" Miyuki asked, sitting up slowly. Midori glanced toward the door, clearly fearful of discovery. "Lady Yoko has received information about tomorrow's visit from the shogun. She believes you should know of it before you meet with His Excellency." The entire situation felt dangerous, potentially a trap, though to what end was unclear. Yet curiosity and the instinct for survival that had kept Miyuki alive in the Oku compelled her to hear more. "Speak then, but quickly. Your absence will be noted if you linger." Midori leaned closer, her voice dropping even further. "The shogun has received a letter from the Dutch captain who arrived last month. It contains warnings about Russian ships approaching our northern islands. Some in the council advocate for stronger coastal defenses, while others insist we should maintain our isolation and simply refuse all foreign ships' entry to our ports." This was significant information, far more detailed than the vague rumors of unrest Miyuki had gathered thus far. It explained the tensions among the daimyo and the renewed interest in political connections that might influence the shogun's decision. "Why does Lady Yoko believe I should know this?" Miyuki asked carefully. "The shogun has asked specifically about your family's domains near the northern sea routes," Midori replied. "He intends to question you about the harbors, the coastal villages, the mountain passes that might allow access to the interior." Miyuki felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Her family's lands were indeed positioned along potential invasion routes from the north. If the shogun was seeking such specific information, it suggested he was seriously considering the threat and potentially planning military preparations that would require cooperation from the northern daimyo. "I see," she said softly. "And how did Lady Yoko come by this information?" Midori hesitated. "She has formed a friendship with one of the shogun's pages, a boy of 14 who attends the council meetings and overhears much. A dangerous connection indeed." If discovered, both Lady Yoko and the page could face severe punishment for exchanging information about state matters. That she would risk her position and her unborn child's future to share this with Miyuki was puzzling. Why would she warn me? Miyuki asked directly. We are not allies. Midori's eyes dropped to the tatami. Lady Yoko believes that divisions among the women of the Oku only serve to weaken all of us. She says that in uncertain times, those who share information may better protect themselves and their children. A surprisingly sophisticated political philosophy from the seemingly naive young concubine. Either Lady Yoko was not what she appeared, or someone else was using her as a conduit for this message. Tell Lady Yoko I appreciate her perspective, Miyuki said carefully, and that I believe harmony within the inner palace benefits us all. Midori nodded, clearly relieved to have delivered her message without specific commitments being made. I should return before my absence is discovered. Go, Miyuki agreed. And Midori, be cautious. The night guards have sharp eyes. The young attendant bowed and slipped away, her footsteps completely silent on the tatami floors, a skill all Oku women learned early, since noise could attract unwanted attention at inopportune moments. Alone again, Miyuki did not return to her futon. Sleep would elude her now, with too many questions crowding her mind. Instead, she moved to the window, sliding the wooden Hamato panel open just enough to gaze at the gardens below. The moon cast silver light across the carefully raked gravel, the precisely trimmed shrubs, the ornamental stones placed according to principles of harmony and balance. Everything in the Oku was controlled, arranged, managed, from the plants in the garden to the women in the chambers. Yet beneath this apparent order ran currents of ambition, fear, resentment, and occasional compassion that no amount of regulation could fully suppress. Lady Yoko's warning, if genuine, suggested possibilities Miyuki had not considered. Perhaps the women of the inner palace could create their own networks of information and support, independent of the male power structures that ultimately controlled their lives. It was a dangerous idea, but also a compelling one. As for the immediate concern, the shogun's interest in her family's northern domains, Miyuki would need to prepare carefully for tomorrow's encounter. She must appear knowledgeable enough to satisfy his questions without revealing anything that might endanger her relatives or their lands. A delicate balance, but one she had been trained since childhood to maintain. The night deepened around Edo Castle, most of its thousands of inhabitants now asleep. But in scattered chambers throughout the vast complex, others like Miyuki remained awake, thinking, planning, worrying about the shifting currents of power that could raise them to new heights or dash them against the rocks of disfavor. In the women's palace, where direct action was severely constrained, information was the primary currency and most potent weapon. Tonight, Miyuki had received an unexpected wealth of both. How she would spend this currency, how she would wield this weapon, these decisions would shape not only her own future, but potentially that of her son and even her family's domains. She closed the window and returned to her futon, though not to sleep. Instead, she began mentally reviewing everything she knew about her family's northern territories. The harbors, the mountain passes, the coastal villages, exactly as the shogun would reportedly ask. She must be prepared for tomorrow's interrogation, disguised as intimacy. This examination masked as desire. In the Oku, even the most private moments served public purposes. The chrysanthemum's shadow was long indeed, and those who dwelled within it learned to navigate by its shifting patterns or risk being swallowed by the darkness that lay beyond. The first gray light of dawn had barely appeared when Miyuki rose from her futon. She had slept little, her mind too active with the implications of Midori's midnight visit and the preparation for the shogun's attention later that day. Still, years of discipline allowed her to function perfectly despite fatigue. Another survival skill honed within the Oku walls. She was already kneeling at her writing table, recording her night thoughts in a carefully coded poem, when Sachi entered with the morning tea. "My lady," Sachi said, surprised to find her mistress already awake and dressed in a simple morning yukata. "You are up early. There is much to prepare today," Miyuki replied, setting aside her brush. "Has word been sent to the bathing attendants?" "Yes, my lady. They will expect you at the hour of the dragon. The finest oils and perfumes have been requested, as befits the honor of His Excellency's attention." Sachi set down the tea tray and knelt opposite Miyuki, her expression serious. "If I may speak freely, my lady." Miyuki nodded, granting permission. After 7 years as her chief attendant, Sachi had earned the right to occasional candor. "It has been 6 years since the shogun last requested your company in such a manner," Sachi said carefully. "While the physical aspects will be familiar to you, the political landscape has changed significantly since then. Lady Keishoin's influence has grown, as has the authority of the great interior elder. Their expectations for this encounter will be different than in previous years." It was as close as Sachi could come to offering a warning similar to Lady Ochiba's. As a servant rather than a former concubine, she could not speak as directly about court politics, but her meaning was clear nonetheless. "I appreciate your thoughtfulness," Miyuki replied. "Indeed, much has changed. We will proceed with appropriate awareness." Sachi bowed, acknowledging the careful acceptance of her counsel. "In practical matters, I have already arranged for the special cosmetics to be delivered, and your most suitable kimono has been aired. The court physician will attend you at midday to ensure your health is optimal." This last was a standard protocol before a concubine received the shogun, ostensibly to prevent the transmission of any illness to His Excellency, though it also served to confirm that the woman was not menstruating, which would make physical relations ritually impure. "Very good," Miyuki said, taking a sip of the fragrant tea. "And has there been any indication of His Excellency's specific requirements for the evening?" Sometimes the shogun sent word of particular garments he wished a concubine to wear, music he wanted performed, or specific topics of conversation he desired. Such instructions provided valuable clues about the true purpose of his visit. "None beyond the standard protocols," Sachi replied. "Though I did learn that you will be his only visit within the Oku tonight. No other ladies have been summoned." This was noteworthy. Often, the shogun would visit multiple concubines in a single night, spending perhaps an hour with each. To devote an entire evening to Miyuki alone suggested either genuine personal interest or a lengthy political discussion disguised as intimacy, or perhaps both. "I see," Miyuki said, setting down her tea bowl. "Then we must ensure that every aspect of the evening's arrangements is perfect. After morning rice, I will review appropriate conversation topics. Scholarly matters seemed to interest His Excellency during our last encounters." "The latest Chinese texts on astronomy arrived in the library last month," Sachi suggested. "I could arrange for them to be brought to your chambers for review." "Excellent," Miyuki agreed. His Excellency has always shown interest in the heavens. The conversation turned to practical preparations. Which incense would perfume the chambers, which seasonal flowers would adorn the alcoves, which sake would be warmed should the shogun desire refreshment. Every detail mattered in the choreographed performance that would unfold that evening. After a light breakfast of rice porridge with pickled vegetables, Miyuki began her physical preparations. First came a visit to the Oku's bathhouse, a luxury rarely afforded to lower-ranking women, who made do with wash basins in their chambers. The bathhouse featured a large wooden tub of cedar, big enough for several women to use simultaneously, though for this occasion, Miyuki had been granted private use due to the significance of her appointment with the shogun. Attendants scrubbed her body with rice bran and special soaps imported from China, paying particular attention to her hands, feet, and neck, areas the shogun was likely to touch directly. Her hair was washed with a paste made from crushed camellia nuts, rinsed with perfumed water, and carefully dried with heated cloths. Every centimeter of her skin was examined for imperfections. Even the smallest blemish would be concealed with makeup before the evening. Following the bath came the application of scented oils derived from flowers and herbs, subtle fragrances that would please without overwhelming. Too strong a perfume suggested a common courtesan. A high-ranking concubine scent should be discoverable only at intimate proximity. "The court physician has arrived, my lady," Tama announced as Miyuki returned to her chambers, wrapped in layers of cotton robes after her bath. The physician, an elderly man permitted into the Oku due to his profession and advanced age, conducted his examination with clinical detachment, checking Miyuki's pulse, examining her tongue and eyes, and asking brief questions about her general health. His presence was a reminder of the dynastic purposes that underlay all relations between the shogun and his concubines. Even after years without physical intimacy, the possibility of conception remained a consideration. "You are in excellent health, Lady Miyuki," he pronounced finally. "I will inform the great interior elder that you are fit to receive His Excellency's attention." After he departed, the more elaborate preparations began. Yuki arrived with the cosmetics: white lead for the face and neck, safflower rouge for the lips and cheeks, charcoal for the eyebrows. Unlike everyday makeup, which was applied with some restraint, the cosmetics for an evening with the shogun were more theatrical. A mask that transformed the wearer into a living artwork, a vision of feminine perfection according to the aesthetic standards of the court. "Not too heavily at the temples," Miyuki instructed as Sachi applied the white lead. His Excellency once commented that he preferred a more natural appearance there. Such details were crucial. Every shogun had his preferences, his particular tastes in female beauty and behavior. A successful concubine remembered these predilections and adapted to them without seeming calculated. The illusion of natural perfection required the most careful artifice. As the makeup was completed, Tama and Yuki began the complex process of dressing Miyuki in the multiple layers of silk that constituted formal attire for an imperial concubine. First came the white silk undergarments, then the various layers of colored juban, each visible at the collar and sleeves in a precisely arranged color harmony. The outermost kimono was a masterpiece of weaving and embroidery. Pale green silk patterned with golden phoenix birds and silver streams, symbolizing renewal and grace. The obi, wider and more elaborate than those worn by common women, was of deep purple brocade embroidered with chrysanthemum patterns and silver thread. It was tied in a complex knot that would present little difficulty in removal while still maintaining perfect appearance until that moment. Everything about the costume was designed to create an impression of ethereal beauty that nonetheless yielded to practical necessity when required. "The hair ornaments from Lady Keisho-in have arrived," Sachi announced, presenting a lacquered box lined with silk. Miyuki raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Lady Keisho-in has sent hair ornaments?" This was unexpected. Such gifts were typically exchanged between women of the Oku to signal alliance or approval. For the shogun's mother to send ornaments on the day Miyuki was to meet with him carried significant meaning. Sachi opened the box to reveal a set of hairpins crafted from tortoise shell and adorned with small jade phoenixes, elegant rather than ostentatious, suitable for a secondary consort rather than a primary wife, yet still clearly valuable and tasteful. A most thoughtful gift, Miyuki observed neutrally, though her mind was analyzing the possible intentions behind it. Was Lady Kisho-in signaling her acceptance of the shogun's renewed interest? Offering a tentative alliance? Or marking Miyuki as someone under her influence? They will complement your kimono perfectly, Sachi noted, setting the box aside for use when Miyuki's hair was arranged later in the day. The midday meal was light, a few delicate portions of food chosen to provide energy without risking digestive discomfort, or, heaven forbid, the embarrassment of hunger sounds during the evening's encounter. Miyuki ate little, her appetite diminished by the combination of anticipation and strategic calculation that occupied her thoughts. After the meal, she spent time reviewing the astronomical texts Sachi had procured from the library. Complex Chinese diagrams of star positions with accompanying explanations of their significance. The shogun was known to have an interest in scientific matters, particularly those relating to the heavens, and Miyuki wished to be prepared for any scholarly discussion he might initiate. As the afternoon progressed, final preparations were made to the chamber where she would receive the shogun. The peony room was not Miyuki's regular quarters, but a special reception room used for the shogun's intimate visits. Located in a secluded section of the oku, it featured painted screens depicting romantic scenes from classical literature, a raised sleeping platform with the finest silk bedding, and elegant furnishings that included a low table for refreshments, cushions for conversation, and strategically placed lamps to create a flattering ambiance. Miyuki was permitted to inspect the room before the final arrangements were completed. She moved through the space with a critical eye, noting the placement of the incense burners, the arrangement of the seasonal flowers, peonies and early irises, in the tokonoma alcove, the position of the sake service, should His Excellency desire refreshment. The night robes had been placed in the cabinet, Sachi informed her, opening a small lacquered chest to reveal garments of nearly transparent silk, beautiful but practical for the evening's intended activities. Miyuki nodded approval. And music? Has His Excellency expressed any preference? No specific request has been made, Sachi replied. I have arranged for the koto to be tuned and placed in the anteroom, should you wish to perform. Musical accomplishment was among the many talents expected of a high-ranking concubine. Miyuki had studied the koto, a 13-stringed zither, since childhood, and was known for her skilled playing. Though the shogun might not request a performance, having the instrument prepared demonstrated appropriate attention to his potential desires. As the hour of the monkey approached, the time when final preparations for the evening would begin, Miyuki returned to her own chambers for the last phase of her transformation. Her hair, which had been allowed to dry naturally after the bath, was now arranged in the formal style favored for imperial concubines, pulled back from the face, formed into loops at the back of the head, and adorned with the phoenix ornaments sent by Lady Kisho-in. The white makeup was refreshed, the red lips repainted to perfect roundness, the oguro black tooth dye carefully applied to her front teeth. This last practice, considered beautiful at court though startling to foreign visitors, created the appearance of a small dark void when she smiled demurely, an effect believed to enhance feminine allure. Remember to suggest, not request, Sachi murmured as she made final adjustments to Miyuki's collar, ensuring the layers of colored silk were visible in perfect harmony. His Excellency prefers to believe that his desires arise unprompted. This was valuable counsel. In the intricate dance of power between the shogun and his concubines, the illusion of male initiative was paramount. A woman might guide the interaction through subtle cues, but must never appear to direct it overtly. The shogun must always feel himself the author of the encounter, even when responding to carefully crafted prompts. "I remember," Miyuki assured her. Though it had been 6 years since her last intimate encounter with the shogun, such lessons were not easily forgotten. As the final touches were applied, a hint of perfume at the wrists and behind the ears, a last inspection of the elaborate costume, Miyuki centered herself mentally. Tonight would require all her diplomatic skills, all her powers of observation and adaptation. She must be concubine, counselor, and confidante, responding to the shogun's needs, whether they were physical, intellectual, or political. And beneath these considerations lay her own agenda: protecting her position, securing her son's future, gathering whatever information might help her navigate the increasingly complex currents of power within the court. The shogun's renewed interest presented both opportunity and danger. How she managed this evening might determine her fate for years to come. "It is time, my lady," Sachi announced as the hour of the dog began. "The messengers have reported that His Excellency has completed his evening meal and will be arriving at the Oku gates shortly." Miyuki rose from her cushion with practiced grace, her elaborate costume settling around her in perfect folds. "Then let us proceed to the peony room. His Excellency should not be kept waiting." With Sachi following at a respectful distance, Miyuki made her way through the corridors of the women's palace toward her appointment with the most powerful man in Japan. A man who was simultaneously her master, her child's father, and a political entity whose favor could elevate or destroy her with a single word. As she walked, the weight of the ornaments in her hair, the restrictive layers of her garments, and the small, shuffling steps required by her tight kimono served as physical reminders of the constraints that shaped her existence. Yet within these constraints, she had learned to find space for maneuver, to create her own forms of agency and influence. Tonight would test all she had learned in 7 years within these walls. All her skills at reading the currents of power and desire, all her ability to present herself as exactly what was needed, while still maintaining her core identity beneath the layers of performance. The chrysanthemum cast its shadow. Miyuki prepared to dance within it, as she had done since the day she entered this golden cage, always balancing precariously between power and peril. The peony room waited in perfect readiness, illuminated by the soft glow of paper lanterns and the subtle flicker of a single oil lamp. Incense burns in a celadon censer, releasing threads of sandalwood and plum blossom into the air. Outside, the garden lay in evening stillness, the carefully arranged stones and pruned pines visible in the moonlight that filtered through the shoji screens. Miyuki knelt in the center of the room, positioned so that the light cast her figure in the most flattering relief. Her posture was perfect, back straight but not rigid, hands folded demurely in her lap, head tilted slightly forward in an attitude of receptive anticipation. She had assumed this position countless times during her years of training, learning precisely how to occupy space in a manner that appeared both natural and artful. In the anteroom, Sachi and 2 other high-ranking attendants waited. They would serve refreshments if summoned, but otherwise remain unseen, invisible presences required by protocol, but excluded from the private interaction between the shogun and his chosen companion. The distant sound of the night watch bell, marking the beginning of the first division of the Hour of the Dog, was followed by a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the Oku. Miyuki could sense it even from within the closed room. The ripple of awareness, the heightened alertness that spread through the women's quarters whenever the shogun was approaching. Then came the soft footfalls in the corridor outside, the murmured exchanges between guards and attendants, the rustle of formal clothing. Miyuki took a single deep breath, centering herself for the performance ahead, then composed her features into an expression of serene welcome. The Fusuma door slid open. His Excellency, Lord Tokugawa Ienobu, Shogun of Japan, announced the chief male attendant with a deep bow. The shogun entered alone, though Miyuki knew his personal guards would remain stationed in the corridor outside. At 49, Lord Ienobu cut an imposing figure despite his recent illness. Tall for a Japanese man, with the broad shoulders and straight posture of one trained in martial arts from childhood, he moved with the deliberate grace of absolute authority. His face, though lined with the responsibilities of rulership, remained handsome. High cheekbones, a strong jaw partially concealed by a neatly trimmed beard, and eyes that missed nothing. He wore court clothing rather than the full formal regalia of his office, a sign that this was, at least ostensibly, a private visit rather than an official one. Still, the quality of the silk, the precision of the tailoring, and the understated elegance of the design all proclaimed his status more effectively than overt ornamentation could have done. Miyuki bowed deeply, her forehead touching the tatami mat. "Your Excellency honors this humble one with your presence," she said, using the formal third-person address required by protocol. Ienobu gestured for her to rise. "Lady Miyuki," he acknowledged, his voice deeper than she remembered. "It has been some time." 6 years, 4 months, and 12 days, Your Excellency," she replied, allowing a hint of warmth to enter her tone, not enough to suggest presumption, but sufficient to indicate that she had marked the absence. A slight smile curved his lips. "You keep precise account. Some absences are more noticeable than others," she said, the faintest suggestion of flirtation in her words. A calibrated response designed to acknowledge his importance without seeming obsequious. He moved further into the room, and Miyuki rose gracefully to serve him. This was part of the ritual, the concubine attending to the shogun's immediate comfort before any substantive interaction could begin. She guided him to the cushion positioned at the head of the room, poured warmed sake into a porcelain cup painted with pine and bamboo motifs, and presented it with both hands, her movements flowing like water. "Your appearance remains unchanged," Ienobu observed as he accepted the cup. "Time seems to have made an exception in your case." "Your Excellency is too kind," Miyuki responded, appropriate modesty coloring her tone, though she recognized the observation as largely accurate. At 32, she had maintained her beauty through rigorous care and the sheltered existence of the oku, where harsh weather and physical labor never marked a high-born woman's skin or hands. "Kindness has little to do with observation," he replied, taking a sip of the sake. "Though I find that time grants perspective that youth lacks. You are always more perceptive than most." This was unexpected, a reference to her intelligence rather than her beauty so early in their encounter. Miyuki adjusted her approach accordingly. "Perspective is indeed a gift of years," she agreed, "though I find that observation within these walls must often substitute for direct experience of the wider world." Ienobu nodded, studying her with those sharp eyes that had assessed diplomatic envoys, rebellious daimyo, and countless supplicants during his reign. "And what have your observations revealed lately, Lady Miyuki?" The question confirmed her suspicion that this visit was not primarily motivated by physical desire. The shogun was seeking information, perspective, perhaps even counsel, though he would never acknowledge the last directly. That change comes even to things that appear permanent, she replied carefully. The cherry blossoms this spring seem to fall more quickly than in previous years. Some say it portends an early summer. He understood her meaning. Political changes were accelerating. Traditions that had seemed immutable were shifting. "And what do you say," he asked, "that wise gardeners prepare for all seasons?" Miyuki responded. "And that cherry blossoms have always been valued precisely because their beauty is transient." Ionobu smiled more fully now, appreciation in his eyes. "I had forgotten how refreshing your conversation could be, Lady Miyuki. So many at court speak only to flatter or to advance their own interests. Perhaps your excellency intimidates them too greatly for honesty," she suggested, a slightly bold statement, but one that acknowledged his power while implying her own courage. He laughed, a rare sound from the usually reserved ruler. "Perhaps. Or perhaps they simply lack your particular combination of intelligence and discretion." He set down his sake cup. "I am told your son shows similar qualities." Takechio. Her heart quickened at the mention of her child, though her face remained composed. "He strives to be worthy of his father's lineage," she said. "I observed his calligraphy practice last week," Ionobu continued. "His brushstroke is remarkably steady for a child of 6. His tutor speaks highly of his comprehension of the classics as well. That the shogun had personally observed Takechio's lessons was significant. A sign of genuine interest in the boy that went beyond mere acknowledgement of paternity." Miyuki allowed herself a moment of maternal pride, carefully balanced with appropriate humility. "Your Excellency's attention honors him," she said. "He speaks often of his desire to serve the Tokugawa house with distinction." Ionobu nodded, seemingly pleased with this response. "I have been considering his future education. There may be an opportunity for him to study with the sons of certain daimyo families, a form of preparation for possible diplomatic service when he comes of age." This was unexpected news, both promising and concerning. Such an appointment would elevate Takechio's status significantly, potentially securing his future in the Tokugawa administration. But it would also place him in close proximity to the children of powerful families, where he might become a pawn in their political machinations. And it would likely take him farther from Edo Castle, reducing Miyuki's already limited contact with her son. "A most generous consideration," she replied, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "Takechio would surely benefit from such distinguished company. Your family's territories lie along the northern sea routes, do they not?" Ionobu asked, shifting topics with the abruptness common to those accustomed to commanding conversations. Here it was, the inquiry that Lady Yoko's midnight message had warned would come. Miyuki maintained her serene expression, giving no indication that she had anticipated this line of questioning. "Yes, Your Excellency. My father's lands border Matsumai domain, though they are modest in comparison. I have been reviewing maps of our northern coastlines," Ionobu said, his tone casual, though his eyes remained sharp. "The harbors in that region, how many would you say could accommodate vessels larger than fishing boats?" Miyuki considered her response carefully. This was not merely curiosity. The shogun was seeking specific information related to defense concerns. Lady Yoko's warning about Russian ships had been accurate. "There are 3 harbors of significant depth in my father's domain," she replied truthfully. "The largest lies beneath the shadow of Mount Kamui and has anchored Chinese trading vessels in the past. The others are smaller, but could likely accommodate ships of similar size if necessary." "And the mountain passes leading inland from these harbors?" "There are 2 primary routes," Miyuki explained, drawing on childhood memories of her homeland. "The path of autumn maples follows the river valley and could admit larger parties, though it becomes impassable during winter snows. The crane's way is narrower but remains open year-round, as it is sheltered from the heaviest snowfall. Ionobu nodded, absorbing this information with evident interest. And the coastal villages, how are they defended? Modestly, Your Excellency. Each maintains a small contingent of samurai, but they are primarily equipped to handle local disturbances or occasional pirate incursions. They have not faced larger threats within living memory. The shogun's expression darkened slightly. Living memory can be a deceptive measure. History teaches that patterns repeat, often when least expected. Indeed, Miyuki agreed. My grandmother often spoke of tales from her own grandmother's time, of strange ships with red-haired men who came to trade but were turned away under the seclusion edicts. Your grandmother was wise to preserve such stories, Ionobu said. The red-haired ones have returned in greater numbers, and now they are joined by others, from Russia to the north, from England to the west, all seeking to pry open our doors for their advantage. This level of candid discussion about foreign policy was unprecedented in Miyuki's experience with the shogun. That he would speak so openly suggested both the gravity of the situation and a degree of trust in her discretion that she had not anticipated. Your Excellency has maintained the wisdom of limited engagement while preserving our sovereignty, she observed carefully. A balance that has served Japan well. A balance increasingly difficult to maintain, he replied, a rare admission of challenge from the absolute ruler. The world beyond our shores grows more insistent, more technologically advanced. Some of my advisors counsel complete rejection of all foreign contact. Others argue for controlled engagement to better understand these potential threats. Miyuki sensed an opportunity to share the information she had received from Master Ryuho without revealing her source. I understand there have been concerns expressed from Mito Domain regarding recent trade allowances. Ionobu's eyebrows rose slightly, surprised that she would possess such specific knowledge. You are well informed for one who dwells within these secluded walls. She inclined her head modestly. I merely observe the ripples that reach even the sheltered pond of the Ooku. Indeed. He studied her with renewed interest. And what do you make of these ripples? This was dangerous territory. Offering direct political opinions to the shogun could be construed as presumption. Yet he had asked directly, and evasion might squander the unusual candor of the moment. I believe that strength comes from knowledge, she said carefully. That understanding one's potential adversaries need not mean adopting their ways. Perhaps limited observation of foreign developments, particularly in maritime and defensive technologies, might serve to protect our traditions rather than dilute them. Ionobu was silent for a long moment, considering her words. An interesting perspective, he said finally. One that echoes certain voices within my council, though they couch their arguments in less elegant terms. He set down his sake cup and moved closer to where she knelt. You have your mother's beauty, but your father's strategic mind, he observed, reaching out to trace the line of her jaw with one finger, the first physical contact of the evening. A most unusual combination. Miyuki lowered her eyes, the gesture both demure and calculated, to create a moment of intimate connection. Both gifts I have attempted to use in service to your excellency. Indeed. His hand lingered at her neck, then moved to release the ornate hairpin that Lady Keishoin had sent, a clear signal that the political discussion was transitioning toward the physical purpose of his visit. And both appreciated, though perhaps not acknowledged as frequently as they deserve. As the first hairpin came free, Miyuki reached up in a practiced motion to catch it, her sleeve falling back to reveal the pale skin of her wrist. Your Excellency's attention is itself the greatest acknowledgement, she murmured. Is it? His voice had deepened, the timbre changing with his shifting focus. I find myself thinking that 6 years is an excessive interval between expressions of appreciation. Time moves differently within these walls, she replied softly, yet some memories remain vivid despite the passing years. His hands moved to the second hairpin, then the third, each removal a step in the ritualized disassembly of her formal appearance. Miyuki responded with the perfect balance of yielding and participation that protocol demanded, neither too eager nor too passive, matching his pace while maintaining the illusion that he directed each moment of the encounter. You remember our previous encounters then? He asked, his fingers now working on the elaborate knot of her obi. Every detail, Your Excellency, she assured him, her hands moving to assist with the loosening of the sash. The honor of your attention leaves lasting impressions. As layers of silk were gradually set aside, the conversation became more personal, less political, though Miyuki remained acutely aware that even these intimate moments served diplomatic purposes. Her responses to his advances, her expressions of pleasure, her attention to his preferences, all were performances designed to strengthen her position, to secure his favor for herself and, by extension, for her son. Yet there was truth within the performance as well. The physical connection, after so many years of ritual celibacy, awakened genuine responses. Inobu was a skilled and considerate lover, attentive to her reactions, patient in his approach, and there was comfort in the familiar patterns of intimacy, in the momentary surrender to sensation, rather than constant calculation. In the shadowed intimacy of the peony room, as moonlight filtered through the shoji screens and the scent of incense mingled with the more immediate aromas of human connection, Miyuki allowed herself to exist briefly in the present moment, neither planning for the future nor analyzing the past. This too was a survival skill within the Oku, the ability to find small pockets of authentic experience within the elaborate constructs of court life. Afterward, as they lay amid the disarranged silk bedding, Yenobu stroked her hair with unexpected tenderness. Your son asked about you last week, he said quietly, during his martial arts practice. He wanted to know if you had been skilled with the naginata in your youth, as many daughters of samurai families are. Miyuki's heart constricted at this evidence that Takechiyo thought of her, asked about her, even during his separate existence in the male quarters of the castle. I was adequately trained, she replied softly, though I would not claim exceptional skill. I told him you excelled in poetry and music instead, Inobu continued. He seemed pleased with this information. He has begun composing verses himself, did you know? I did not, she admitted, the pain of these missed connections with her child momentarily overwhelming her careful composure. But it gladdens me to hear it. Inobu was silent for a moment, his fingers still moving through her unbound hair. Perhaps arrangements could be made for you to observe one of his poetry lessons, he said finally. From behind a screen, of course, as propriety demands, but it might please you both. This unexpected kindness, this recognition of the maternal bond that court protocols typically subordinated to political considerations, touched Miyuki deeply. Your Excellency is most generous, she said, unable to entirely mask the emotion in her voice. Not generous, he corrected, his tone thoughtful, merely increasingly aware of time's passage and of connections that deserve acknowledgement. He sat up then, the intimate moment passing as he reached for his discarded robe. I have decided to appoint Takechiyo to the ceremonial role during the Sano festival, he announced, his voice resuming its more formal cadence. He will carry the sacred Sakaki branch during the third procession, a visible honor that will establish his position more firmly within the public understanding of the Tokugawa lineage. A great honor indeed, Miyuki agreed, following his lead and returning to more formal interaction. She rose gracefully, retrieving her own inner robe and drawing it around her shoulders as protocol required. Remaining partially unclothed in the shogun's presence would suggest an unseemly casualness. Lady Keisho-in suggested the appointment, Ienobu added, watching Miyuki's face closely for her reaction. This was surprising news. The shogun's mother had never shown particular favor toward Takechio before. That she would advocate for his public recognition suggested a shift in her political calculations, perhaps related to the foreign threats they had discussed earlier, perhaps connected to internal court factions. Her ladyship is wise in matters of tradition and lineage, Miyuki said carefully. Her support honors both Takechio and myself. Ienobu nodded, apparently satisfied with this response. The boy will need preparation, both in the ceremonial aspects and in understanding the significance of such public visibility. I will instruct his tutors accordingly. May I be permitted to help prepare him as well? Miyuki asked, seizing the opportunity this conversation presented. Perhaps through letters of guidance, if direct instruction is not deemed appropriate? The shogun considered this request, his expression unreadable. Written counsel would be acceptable, he decided finally. Your insights on court protocol could prove valuable to his education. This concession, this small opening for maternal influence in her son's life, was perhaps the most significant outcome of the evening's encounter. Miyuki bowed deeply, genuine gratitude infusing the formal gesture. Your Excellency's wisdom and generosity are boundless. Ienobu rose fully then, and Miyuki moved to assist him with his clothing. Another ritual that marked the conclusion of their time together. As she helped arrange his formal robes, he spoke again of the northern territories, asking more detailed questions about coastal villages, local leadership, and the temperament of the people there. They are loyal to tradition, she assured him, understanding his underlying concern about potential foreign influence. And to the Tokugawa house above all. Their isolation has preserved their dedication to the old ways. Isolation has served many purposes over the generations, he observed, allowing her to secure the final layer of his attire. Yet even the most secluded harbor feels the distant effects of great storms at sea. True wisdom lies in distinguishing between waves that must be resisted and those that might be channeled to strengthen our shores, Miyuki suggested, venturing one final political observation before their encounter concluded. Ienobu looked at her with renewed appreciation. A poetic yet astute observation, he acknowledged. One I may share with my council, though perhaps without attributing its source. Some might find wisdom from the women's quarters difficult to accept. Wisdom belongs to no single garden, Miyuki replied, though different flowers bloom in different soils. He smiled at that. Indeed. He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at her with an expression that seemed almost wistful. 6 years was too long an absence, he said quietly. I shall not make the same error again. With that, he was gone, the Fuzuma door sliding closed behind him, the sounds of his attendants rising to accompany him back to the male quarters of the castle. Miyuki remained kneeling, protocol requiring that she maintain her position until the shogun had fully departed from the women's palace. Only when Sachi entered some minutes later did she finally relax her perfect posture, allowing herself a deep breath that released some of the tension of the evening's performance. All went well, my lady? Sachi asked, her question encompassing far more than the physical aspects of the encounter. Yes, Miyuki replied simply, too weary for detailed explanation. Bring me my sleeping robe. I will bathe in the morning." As Sachi helped her into the simple cotton yukata, removing the last traces of makeup with oil-soaked cloths, Miyuki allowed her mind to begin processing the significant developments of the day. The political information gathered at Lady Keishoin's tea ceremony, the warning from Lady Yoko via her messenger, Lady Ochiba's historical perspective, and now the shogun's unexpected confidences about foreign threats and his decision regarding Takechiyo's ceremonial role. Each piece interlocked with the others, forming a complex mosaic of court politics and international concerns. The permission to write to her son, the shogun's promise of continued attention, Lady Keishoin's apparent shift towards support rather than suspicion, all suggested an improvement in Miyuki's position within the Ooku hierarchy. Yet with elevated status came greater visibility and, consequently, greater vulnerability. As Takechiyo stepped into a more public role, both he and Miyuki would face increased scrutiny from potential rivals. The shogun's renewed favor was a double-edged sword, offering protection but also making her a more tempting target for those who might see her as an obstacle to their own ambitions. When Sachi had finished her ministrations and withdrawn for the night, Miyuki moved to the window, sliding the wooden panel open to gaze at the garden now bathed in full moonlight. The air carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the distant sound of the watch drum marking the hour of the boar. One full day had passed since she had knelt in this same spot the previous night, contemplating the precarious nature of her existence within the Uku. In those 24 hours, subtle but significant shifts had occurred in the complex web of relationships and power dynamics that governed her life. New possibilities had emerged, new dangers had revealed themselves, new alliances had begun to form. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, correspondence to compose for her son, careful cultivation of the tentative connection with Lady Yoko, strategic responses to Lady Keishoin's apparent overture of support. The delicate balancing act would continue, requiring constant vigilance and perfect control. Yet tonight, in the quiet aftermath of the shogun's visit, Miyuki allowed herself a rare moment of hope. Her son would stand in sunlight during the Sano festival, visible to the people of Edo as a recognized member of the Tokugawa lineage. She would have permission to guide him through written counsel, to maintain a maternal connection despite their physical separation. And the shogun himself had acknowledged her value, not just as a beautiful possession, but as a source of insight and perspective. Within the constrained world of the Oku, where women's power was always indirect, always contingent on male approval, these were significant victories. Not freedom, never that, but perhaps a widening of her cage, a strengthening of her position within the golden prison that had been her home for 7 years. Miyuki closed the window and moved to her futon, her body finally registering the exhaustion of a day spent in constant diplomatic performance. As she settled beneath the light summer coverings, her thoughts turned once more to Takechiyo, imagining his small hands practicing calligraphy, his serious face concentrating on poetry composition, his voice asking questions about the mother he saw so rarely. "I will protect you," she whispered into the darkness, the promise both prayer and determination. "Whatever storms approach our shores, whatever intrigues swirl within these walls, I will ensure your path remains secure." Outside, the night deepened over Edo Castle. Guards patrolled the stone pathways, lanterns glowed in distant windows, and thousands of lives continued their circumscribed patterns within the vast complex that housed the heart of Japanese power. In her small corner of this elaborate human mechanism, Miyuki finally surrendered to sleep, her dreams carrying her beyond the Uku walls to northern shores, where wild seas crashed against ancient rocks, and a small boy with her eyes and the shogun's brow flew a paper crane against a limitless sky. Dawn light filtered through the shoji screens, painting Miyuki's chambers in soft gold. She had risen early, completing her morning rituals with focused determination. Now she knelt at her writing table, brush poised over fine paper, composing the first of what would become regular letters of instruction to her son, a precious connection granted by the shogun's unexpected concession. My dear Takechiyo, as the spring flowers open to embrace the sun's return, so too does my heart open at the news of your accomplishments. Your father speaks with pride of your progress in calligraphy and martial arts, and I am told you have begun to compose poetry, a joy that has sustained me through many seasons within these walls. The honor bestowed upon you for the Sano Festival reflects the brightness of your spirit and the strength of your lineage. As you prepare for this role, remember that you carry not only the sacred Sakaki branch, but also the hopes of those who have come before you and those who will follow. When standing before the people of Edo, breathe deeply and move with measured steps. Keep your gaze forward, but your awareness extended to all around you. In this way, you honor both heaven and earth with your presence. The brush moved smoothly across the paper, each character formed with perfect control. In these words, formally instructional yet infused with maternal care, Miyuki created a bridge across the physical separation imposed by court protocols. Through this correspondence, she would guide her son in the intricate navigation of power and politics that had become her own expertise. Beyond her window, the oku stirred to life. Attendants hurrying along corridors, kitchen staff preparing morning meals, guards changing shifts at the various checkpoints. Another day began within the women's palace, with its complex hierarchies and carefully regulated routines. For Miyuki, this day would differ from countless others that had preceded it. The shogun's renewed attention had altered her status. Already she had received morning greetings from women who had previously ignored her. Lady Keisho-in had sent a formal note acknowledging her gracious acceptance of the hair ornaments and opening for future communication. Even Lady Yoko had arranged to meet later for incense appreciation, a socially acceptable context for the potential alliance suggested by her midnight message. The chrysanthemum's shadow had shifted, illuminating different aspects of the golden cage that was the oku. Miyuki would continue to navigate its confines with the same intelligence and perfect control that had preserved her thus far, but with new purpose, new connections, new possibilities for influence. She finished the letter with formal closing phrases, then set aside her brush. After the ink dried, the message would be inspected by palace officials before being delivered to her son's quarters. A reminder that even this private communication remained subject to institutional oversight. Yet the constraints that governed her existence could not diminish the quiet satisfaction Miyuki felt as she reviewed her work. Within the carefully chosen words lay genuine maternal guidance, emotional connection disguised as formal instruction, love embedded in protocol-appropriate phrases. This was the essence of life within the oku, finding spaces for authentic humanity within the elaborate structures of court society, creating meaning despite restrictions, building connections across imposed barriers. It was a life of constant performance, yet the performer remained real beneath the many layers of presentation. As sunlight strengthened across the garden, illuminating the first peonies beginning to bloom along the stone path, Miyuki rose from her writing table. The day ahead would demand all her diplomatic skills, all her careful attention to the shifting currents of palace politics. But she faced these challenges with renewed purpose. her position strengthened by the shogun's favor, her maternal connection to Takichio formally acknowledged, her network of allies beginning to expand. The chrysanthemum throne cast long shadows, and those who dwelled within them walked a perpetual knife's edge between power and peril. Yet even in shadow, flowers could bloom, connections could form, influence could grow. Miyuki had mastered the art of thriving in this rarefied atmosphere, finding strength in constraint, power in observation, and occasional joy in the careful performance of her role. Another day in the life of a high-ranking concubine began, each hour a delicate balancing act between protocol and personal agency, between public performance and private purpose. The golden cage remained, its bars no less real than before, but within its confines, Miyuki had created her own forms of freedom, small, circumscribed, yet genuinely hers. And that perhaps was the most significant victory of all.